Woman helps her neighbor in quarantine using the last method people suspected. In uncertain times, it is important to have people to rely on. If you're one of the lucky ones, that may come in the form of family, kids, siblings, or parents that can help care of you in times of need. The sad thing is, many people don't have a support system. Enter a good Samaritan like Karen Eveleth of Manitou Springs, Colorado. In our modern times, people hardly know their neighbors anymore, and it's far from common practice to ask for a cup of sugar. But Eveleth thought differently. She saw her elderly neighbor in need and stepped up with the help of a very important friend. Under normal circumstances, a trip to the grocery store is a simple chore for anyone. However, things were far from normal for Karen Eveleth and her neighbor, Renee Hellman. In fact, things were far from normal for anyone. Because of the lockdowns due to the threat of the coronavirus, many people were struggling to find a sense of normalcy, let alone some groceries. Under government recommendations, no one was leaving their home much, especially Renee Hellman. For 71-year-old Renee, avoiding the grocery store was a matter of life and death. See, because of her age and medical conditions, she was at a particularly high risk during the coronavirus epidemic. Hellman has COPD and heart problems. These underlying conditions, combined with her age, made it even more crucial for her to stay indoors and practice social distancing to avoid the infectious virus. Of course, this presented some problems. The elderly woman still had to cook for herself and eat, but the challenge of obtaining food was becoming dire. She had been isolated in her house for weeks, and her supply of food was slowly running out. With no family in the area, Hellman didn't know what to do. Luckily, her neighbor of 10 years had an idea after she saw a story on the news about dogs comforting people in hospitals. I thought, wait a second, I have a dog that could help, Eveleth told CNN. She called up Hellman and offered to get her groceries, as she knew she was isolated and didn't have a way to re-up on much-needed food. Eveleth headed home with groceries for Hellman. Instead of dropping them off at the front door, she decided she would enlist a very special delivery method. This way, her elderly neighbor would get her groceries and an added bonus. This is where Eveleth's 7-year-old golden retriever named Sundance came into the picture. More than an adorable face, retrievers are programmed to, well, retrieve things, making them the fetch champions of the dog world. Eveleth knew Sundance could handle this task. So, she got to work training him to walk next door with groceries for Hellman, and it didn't take long for him to get the hang of it. Soon, Hellman was getting daily deliveries from Sundance. The pup brought over chicken, flour, vegetables, and pre-made meals in bowls for the older woman, all delivered with a smile for nothing but a few pets. I make meals for her also, and Sundance brings back the empty bowls, Eveleth told CNN. Every day we send something back and forth. He's just happy to do his job, Hellman said, and to see his favorite treat waiting for him after he completes his daily errands. Sundance is a born helper, even outside being Hellman's delivery boy. He's a humble hero. When he hears something drops, he knows I've got to get that for Mom because I have a bad back. He also gets the mail. I have the carrier leave the box open. Sonny has 2 siblings, but delivery and pickup is not in their DNA, Eveleth told CNN. Sundance is not the only neighbor who has gone out of their way to check in on Hellman during the epidemic, but it's hard to believe he isn't the cutest. Along with her groceries, Sundance offers her something else that is just as important. Being completely isolated for weeks on end can be damaging to one's mental health, especially in times of crisis and anxiety. When Sundance arrives at Hellman's front door, even if it's just for a moment, she has a companion. When human connection is scarce, animals can be a much-needed lifeline for many lonely people. Having a dog has been known to lower blood pressure and reduce stress and anxiety levels. During times of self-isolation, many people have caught on to this trick. While many of the major shelters in cities like Los Angeles and New York City have closed, dogs and cats have been welcomed into the homes of hundreds of thousands of Americans at an incredible rate. Much like the therapy dogs that have been used in hospitals or brought into universities during exam weeks, it is a well-known fact that dogs simply make every situation better with their wagging tails and infallible joy. As for Sundance, he's just doing what comes naturally. Of her personal hero, Hellman can't help but gush. When speaking of the golden retriever, she smiled and said, "He is a fun one." So what if your groceries come with a little bit of slobber around the edges? Sundance is just one of the many ways people around the world are coping with isolation and quarantine. A lot of adults have grown out of nightlife when starting a family, but the extended quarantine will make anyone Jones for a night out on the town. For Jo Bautel, that was her whole business. The 40-year-old still hit the pub most nights, and not just for a pint. She was the head honcho at Noel's Arms, a popular tavern in the village of Melton Mowbray. Though your typical pubs were a dime a dozen across England, there was something about Jo's place that kept customers coming back again and again. The warm atmosphere, live music, and friendly staff made Noel's a personal hangout, not just a place to buy drinks. Jo employed a number of fantastic staff members, all of whom were tremendously proud of their work. None of them had any inkling it would all be taken away. One March night in 2020, the employees closed up after another packed musical performance. Collecting tabs, sweeping up floors, exchanging farewells, this would be the last time they went through their regular routine before disaster struck. COVID-19 swept through the entire world that spring, and Jo's quaint town of Leicestershire was no exception. Society came to a grinding halt, leaving the devoted staff of Noel's Arms in dire straits. With the populace of Melton Mowbray ordered to shelter in their homes, Jo had no choice but to close her pub for the foreseeable future. Her own family was fortunate enough to get through the pandemic financially, but she feared for her bartenders. So reliant on nightly tips, her bar staff had no way to make ends meet. They could join the legions of other displaced workers waiting for unemployment to kick in, but that fragile safety net could only catch so many of them. Jo was at a loss. Obviously, she understood the need to keep everyone physically isolated, but she still wished there was a way to keep Noel's Arms going. The bar owners saw just how badly people craved community. That much was evident, whether Jo was looking out her windows at the sad zombies shuffling 6 feet apart down the street or at her friends complaining on social media. It seemed everyone was keeping busy with one activity in particular: drinking. Shacked up all alone, folks all across the village were knocking back bottle after bottle. Jo only wished there were some way to at least bring the imbibers together. One glance at her computer gave her an idea. Jo set up an impromptu video call with the key members of Noel's Arms team. Everyone had computers and booze, she pointed out, so why didn't they recreate the pub in another form? Understandably, there was some skepticism at first. But with no better alternatives, Jo and her colleagues set up the virtual pub on Facebook. There, the bar could host performances, encourage conversations, and share a drink, albeit from different places. They sent out hundreds of invitations to Noel's Arms regulars and waited for a response. As luck would have it, Jo's patrons loved the idea. Old friendships were rekindled, plus members of the group were kind enough to send financial contributions to the pub staff. Soon, however, the page got out of control. Sure enough, Facebook users who'd never even heard of the Noel's Arms were intrigued by the virtual pub. They wanted to get in on the action. With a click of a button, more customers than Jo ever could have imagined poured in. The bar veteran almost didn't know how to handle the tens of thousands of additions. "It is completely blown up. We've got 3,000 members just waiting for approval. It's like there's a queue at the door to get in," she described in amazement. Even while vetting certain members, interactions in the virtual pub did get a little unruly from time to time. Fortunately, Joe hired a couple of bouncers to keep everyone in check and on occasion toss out troublemakers. The pub took a new twist or turn each day. One day, a debate broke out in regards to the best way to fold your toilet paper. An appropriate topic, given some patrons' tendency to hoard the stuff. But even the squabbles were a part of that community feeling. Some members got really into it and decorated corners of their own homes like a mini pub. Jo never could have foreseen the scope of her virtual pub, but she understood why it meant so much. Everyone is buying into it as they can sit at home and be entertained as if they are in the same place, Jo explained. It is a haven. Of course, some drinkers prefer their personal bars to be a bit more real. For Jane Tapper, her husband Paul was her entire world. She wanted nothing more than to maximize their quality time together, but one nasty habit was driving them apart. Jane was fed up. Paul had a good job as an engineer, standing out as one of the most accomplished blokes in southern England. What he got up to after business hours, however, made Jane want to scream. Rather than zipping back to their home in Newton Abbot, Paul regularly took a detour to a less wholesome destination. He'd meet his mates in the parking lot, and then they would get down to what they did best: drinking. Paul and his buddies knocked back pint after pint at the pub. The mischief never got out of hand, but it irked Jane that her husband spent more time at the local watering hole than he did at home. And when the engineer did make it back to their cozy domicile, he was shocked to find his wife in such sour spirits. Paul recalled that he found himself in the doghouse on a regular basis. Still, he had no plans to change his behavior. Jane, meanwhile, was desperate for a way to see more of her husband. It wasn't the fact that she was antisocial. In fact, she loved entertaining friends and family. The beleaguered wife wondered if she could pull Paul back home. Previously, Jane toyed around with the idea of opening her own restaurant or bar. But after hearing about the difficulties of getting such an enterprise off the ground, she decided it wasn't worth the financial risk. Still, was there a more feasible middle ground? Perhaps, but that wasn't the question on Paul's mind. He was too busy wondering, when he got back home one night, why his beloved was having their entire backyard leveled. But Jane wouldn't spoil the big surprise. Even as the lumber came together as a building frame, she wouldn't reveal what she had in store. Obviously, this was no ordinary garden shed. The construction became increasingly elaborate. Paul got a little miffed at Jane's radio silence, especially since the project was costing them close to £20,000. But the day of reckoning was just around the corner. With the flip of a come-in-where-open sign, Jane unveiled her big secret. She built a pub in the backyard. Paul barely knew what to say at first, but he knew one thing. He wanted to go in. Playing off of her husband's favorite catchphrase, Jane called it the Doghouse Inn. Fortunately, the door was big enough for both two-legged and four-legged customers to venture inside. Paul was stunned by what he saw. Blowing away your average man cave, the Doghouse Inn was the pub of Paul's dreams. Fun knickknacks, impressive hardwood features, and a cozy interior made it the perfect place to enjoy a cold one. And this bar packed way more than just a mini fridge. As a mother of 3 adult children, Jane knew how to be prepared for any situation. That's why she stocked the doghouse with a full bar, guaranteeing that even the pickiest drinker could find a beverage of their liking. And Jane planned on inviting tons of people over too. Though she wanted her hubby to spend more time at home, she looked forward to chewing the fat with their favorite neighbors and drinking buddies. After all, there were a surprising number of activities in the pub. Besides the usual dartboards, cards, and board games, Jane went out of her way to grab a true classic. She installed a genuine Space Invaders arcade cabinet, taking Paul back to his gaming prime in the 1980s. While the doghouse cost a pretty penny, Jane was savvy when it came to certain purchases. Instead of commissioning new seating, she bought a couple of pews from a shuttered church for next to nothing. Plus, she predicted the whole venture would save them money. Paul fell into a rut of going out and blowing tons of dough at the bars every night, but now the doghouse could be his primary haunt. He was pretty sure the bartender there would give him freebies every now and again. Paul immediately made himself at home in the doghouse, which even had a beer garden for when the British summer would finally appear. When he asked Jane how she made all this happen, it turned out she'd combed the web for other DIY inspirations. Jane learned about other innovators, like Jesse Lipskin, who made treasure out of another man's trash. Jessie wanted to go out and explore the world while providing for herself in a way that didn't harm the planet. Unfortunately, this dream looked to be miles and miles away. Her current situation had her bogged down in a New York City office. The crowds, litter, and concrete were wearing her down. One night, however, a movie gave Jessie a monumental idea. She devoured the documentary Garbage Warrior, which detailed the work of eco-architect Michael Reynolds. He advocated a lifestyle that repurposed older materials in order to exist more sustainably. This got Jessie thinking, what if she could live out on the road? If Jessie got permission to work remotely, she could go wherever she pleased, never tethered to one place. She started looking at some RVs, but most of those clunkers just didn't fit her vision. When scrolling through eBay one night, she devised a crazy plan. Jessie came across a 1966 bus for sale, and she wondered if she could turn it into her dream home. Of course, it wouldn't be a walk in the park. The old Greyhound was over 50 years old, but it looked like it could have been 100. That's why it was only listed at $5,000. Jessie realized it would require a ton of work to make it livable, but she didn't listen to the naysayers. She made the purchase. One factoid that motivated Jessie was that her bus was the same model driven by Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves in Speed. Jessie's vehicle, on the other hand, wasn't going anywhere for the time being. The battered Greyhound was barely roadworthy, let alone a viable home. It sat idle in Jessie's driveway longer than she'd like to admit. Finally, she knew she had to get started on her big project. Otherwise, the bucket of bolts would rust there forever. So Jessie dove right in. She'd undertaken some DIY projects before, so she had no problem tearing out the old interior and assembling the wooden frames for the cabinets and furniture. 1 year passed by, and then another. The bus home started to take shape, though Jessie understood she'd need a little help fitting it out like a proper house. Crafty as she was, she didn't have any experience with plumbing or electricity. With a little help from her friends, Jessie outfitted the Greyhound with all the proper amenities. She'd have light, running water, and most importantly, Wi-Fi. From there, she had to make it look sleek, both inside and out. With the proper furnishings and a ton of white paint, the 1966 bus finally looked like it was beyond the scrap heap. Jessie invited her friends and family to inspect the final product, and they could hardly believe their eyes. The 3 years of renovation really paid off. Stepping through the door, you would almost forget that you were inside an old bus. The 400 square foot interior was incredibly chic and modern, with enough decor to make it feel personal. Aside from looks, the Greyhound contained all the essentials of any home. Jessie built a full kitchen, ideal for cooking a gourmet meal. In all likelihood, she'd be eating better on the road than she ever did in her apartment. Naturally, the Greyhound also featured a full bathroom with a shower. Just because Jessie planned on living out on the road didn't mean she had to be roughing it, after all. Impressively, she managed to cram a ton of storage into the narrow bus. Because she planned to be driving through every terrain and every type of weather, Jessie included a closet capable of holding her entire wardrobe. With a luxurious bedroom at the tail end, the bus turned out better than Jessie ever hoped. She exclaimed, "It was a labor of love, and I felt a true sense of accomplishment once everything came together." Jessie absolutely fell in love with her new lifestyle. Each morning she'd wake up in a different part of the country, her view perfectly framed by her personal library and velvet curtains. The adventurer wound her way all over America's highways, working remotely while leaving enough time to explore her surroundings. After countless journeys, however, she found herself starting to miss her stable home. After years of fun and hard labor, Jessie decided to part ways with her beloved bus. In 2018, she put it up for sale with a $149,000 price tag, a true testament to all the improvements she made. Fortunately, the Greyhound found a second or third life as a mobile Airbnb. It has no shortage of customers either. Tons of people are curious to try out the mobile lifestyle, though a few are embarking on awe-inspiring DIY projects of their own. Martin Hill and Iona Stewart liked the sound of a mobile bus. The UK couple planned an outdoor trek through Europe, so it didn't make sense for them to book a series of hotel rooms. They didn't exactly want to rough it out on campgrounds either. After a few beers one night, Martin mulled over buying a big RV. But then a more creative thought popped into his head. What if he and Iona built their own mobile home? Martin went on eBay and found exactly what he was looking for, an old bread truck. Fortunately, Iona was all for Martin's plan, especially since they got the truck for less than $5,000. Still, there was no denying that it was in pretty rough shape. Could they really turn this old scrap heap into a livable vehicle? Most people wouldn't have dreamed of attempting such a daring renovation, but Iona and Martin were the perfect pair to pull off this stunt. They drew up plans for their truck house and bought all the materials necessary to turn it into a real home. A talented artist, Iona was in charge of interior decoration. She figured out the best arrangement for all the furnishings and added certain touches to make the house feel more like a home. Meanwhile, Martin handled the actual construction aspect. Installing the hardware, electricity, and plumbing into the truck proved to be quite a tall order, but that didn't stop him from having some fun while he was at it. Iona also enjoyed herself as they worked their way closer to the final product. Once the basic bed frame was up, she broke out her killer Dracula impression. Or maybe she was just exhausted and needed a nap. At the same time, they put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into their project. Construction took 4 months of full-time work. Martin and Iona could only hope that all their efforts wouldn't be a bust. At last, the time came to unveil their tricked-out truck. With a fresh coat of sleek gray paint, it definitely looked like it could handle Europe's most mountainous roads. But would it be comfortable enough for Martin and Iona to kick back and relax in? The transformation was unbelievable. The cold and empty truck trailer now looked like it came straight out of an interior design magazine. On top of that, Martin and Iona managed to split the limited space into 4 separate rooms. These travelers didn't need to worry if there were no restaurants nearby, because they had a fully stocked kitchen on their hands. With a fridge, stove, oven, and microwave, they could whip up any recipe they wanted after a long day of hiking or snowboarding. Their attention to detail in the kitchen was impressive too. Just take a look at the trendy hardwood countertops and tiled walls. Most homes would be hard-pressed to have interiors that are so sleek and up-to-date. Although the entire length of the apartment was only 28 feet long, Iona and Martin still had plenty of room for visitors. Iona's mom and dad even dropped by for a visit. You can't diss the house truck idea once it's got the parental seal of approval. All the inhabitants, whether the couple had guests over or not, were guaranteed to stay toasty thanks to a stove that heated the entire truck. This feature was especially useful as Martin and Iona spent a lot of time in the Alps. That's also where they met years ago. On the other side of the trailer, these two had a bedroom that would rival accommodations at a 5-star hotel. "It's amazing what you can do. We're not exactly slumming it," quipped Martin, clearly proud of his handiwork. In addition to the space under the bed, where Iona liked to pretend to be a vampire, the couple included storage spaces just about wherever they could. That way, they could bring along all their cold weather and athletic gear without it clogging up the living room. When nature calls on a wintry night in the Alps, you'd hate to have to pull over on the side of the road. Thinking ahead, Martin and Iona fitted out a full bathroom. It's pretty impressive that they somehow included actual plumbing in a bare-bones truck trailer. Iona also squeezed in plenty of her artwork throughout each room to give their house on wheels a little more character. With any luck, the wolf in this painting would be the only one they come across on their travels. Of course, the couple didn't spend all their time inside their luxury vehicle. They had too many scenic views and hiking trails to explore. Hopefully, they had enough wall space to hang up all the fantastic photographs they took during their trip. All in all, Martin and Iona spent an additional $25,000 refitting the old truck into a home. However, it was certainly worth the cost. They now had a dream home they could take anywhere, and it sure beat the heck